like to hand over to the Director of the UNODC Division of Treaty Affairs, Mr. John Brandolino, for his welcoming remarks and officially to launch this meeting. Mr. Director, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco, and good afternoon, everyone from Vienna. I would like to welcome all of you who are joining this high-level opening to the Education for Justice Global Dialogue Series, which builds on the success of the 2019 E4J International High-Level Conference. And of course, a warm welcome today to UNESCO and the state of Qatar, our partners in organizing this event, and special thanks to the state of Qatar for their vision and support in helping create the Education for Justice Initiative, or E4J as it's known. It's also great to be opening this session. Once again, we've opened sessions before with Stefania Giannini, the Assistant Director General of UNESCO. Nice to see you again, Stefania. In addition, our appreciation to all the high-level participants from member states who are joining us today. And thank you for your availability during these challenging times, and particularly during these times of many virtual demands. And we look forward to learning more about your experiences promoting quality education and for the rule of law and ensuring that learning never stops during these challenging times. We're seeing much enthusiasm and support for the Education for Justice Initiative, which is one of the few initiatives of the UN that promotes education for the rule of law and SDG 16 as an essential building block for societies around the world. It is part of UNODC's larger global program for the implementation of the Doha Declaration, which supports the implementation of the aspirations of member states as reflected in the Doha Declaration and the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular, the promotion of a culture of lawfulness generally. E4J is not only a unique and innovative initiative, but it also builds on UNODC's longstanding experience in crime prevention and criminal justice, trying to transform policy into action. Until recently, working with educators, schools, and universities had not been a main focus of UNODC's work. However, that changed 5 years ago when member states, during the 13th United Nations Congress on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, which happens, the congresses happen every 5 years. They're the largest gatherings in the world related to crime prevention and criminal justice. Member states agreed at that time on the importance of education relating to crime prevention and the rule of law. And this has empowered us, UNODC and others, to reach out to new stakeholders, to educators around the world, and to conceptualize the E4J initiative to complement our efforts to support member states in making the world safer from crime, corruption, and terrorism. The Doha Declaration was adopted at the conclusion of the 13th Congress, and it highlights the importance of education as a tool for preventing crime and corruption. And education, of course, is now broadly recognized as such a tool and an end in itself to promote peace, justice, and equality for sustainable development. It has a major role to play in shaping the values of future generations, building collective consciousness, reshaping societal values, and complementing this with the necessary skills to move to action. In acknowledging the impact of the pandemic on education, E4J moved to innovative approaches to address the new barriers and disruptions that have emerged and to ensure the continuity of skill development, teaching, and learning. And despite the pandemic, we continue to develop, as does UNESCO, and disseminate education materials in crime prevention and criminal justice in different languages throughout the world. We're also continuing to engage youth in rule of law issues and assist member states in integrating these programs into their school systems and universities, with a special focus on ensuring more resilient education systems during times of crisis. The SDGs, specifically SDG 4.7, are connected to E4J, as the initiative calls for member states to engage in education on the promotion of culture of peace and nonviolence. This week's Global Dialogue Series will allow the exchange of views and practices on how to accelerate the implementation and mutual reinforcement of SDG 4 and SDG 16, while bearing in mind the challenges and disruptions caused by the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. And during the next few days, we will focus on how to create and strengthen partnerships to promote the rule of law through education, including with governments, the private sector, and civil society organizations. We will be covering all levels of education, primary, secondary, and tertiary. And the recommendations coming out of this event will be instrumental to further shape the E4J initiative so that it continues to add value to the wide array of activities already undertaken in this area, and to send a message to the world that education and the rule of law is key to building back better post-COVID-19. In closing, I wish you fruitful discussions during the coming 3 days. It should be an interesting initiative, and by combining our efforts, we can continue to support education professionals and institutions in achieving the SDGs and playing a role in inclusive recovery and the pandemic. Now I have the pleasure to turn over the floor to our dear partner in E4J and a number of initiatives that we've been doing together, to Stefania Giannini, the Assistant Director General of UNESCO. Over to you.
Thank you very much, John. A great pleasure to see you. Good afternoon and greetings from Paris to everybody. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. It's a great pleasure, first of all, to join you in this opening section of the Education for Justice Global Dialogue series. And I think it's important to underline that you and ODC and UNESCO today join forces together with the state of Qatar in the context of our partnership to support the implementation of the Doha Declaration. And this is very much about putting together and filling the gap somehow between the education and justice sectors, and which today currently more than ever face interconnected challenges. And this is about what I would like briefly in my introductory remarks to focus on. Let me start to mention which we are already learning from this COVID-19 pandemic and its strong impact on our topics, on our mission in education, and looking at the linkages between education and justice. The COVID-19 pandemic, as you maybe know, has from the very beginning amplified inequalities by depriving many of the most vulnerable learners, girls, refugees, persons with disabilities, as well as those learners, very many in the world, with low connectivity, from their fundamental right to education. Let me recall some numbers that UNESCO immediately from the beginning of the crisis started to put on the screen. 1.5 billion students and youth from 190 countries across the planet have been impacted by school and university closures due to the pandemic. And at least 470 million students didn't have access to connectivity worldwide and were therefore unable to pursue their studies during the lockdown, as governments and ministries of education immediately started to put in practice e-learning platforms, and in order to assure continuity of learning, and UNESCO support in this job, of course, with our partners. UNESCO estimates now that 24 million students are at risk of dropout this year in the coming weeks and months due to the pandemic's economic impact. So it's, to summarize and cut it short, it's an unprecedented situation for sure. The pandemic, on the other side, has also demonstrated that no education system is prepared to withstand such a shock. At the same time, it has highlighted concerns about a potential erosion of human rights and the rule of law in our societies. Let me recall what the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, warned in April this year, that the COVID-19 crisis was becoming a human rights crisis, where emergency measures taken to contain the pandemic were maintained beyond what was strictly necessary. In some contexts, the crisis has provided a pretext, we must say very clearly, for repressive measures unrelated to the pandemic itself, to exclude and discriminate against specific targeted groups. Well, to protect the right to education during this unprecedented disruption and situation, UNESCO launched an initiative last March, a global education coalition, as a platform for collaboration and exchange, as a platform to share experiences, knowledge, better practices, and also to share some huge challenges from the beginning at the ministerial level and the community of experts and practitioners level. The coalition today brings together more than 150 members coming from the traditional UN system, sister agencies and partners in education and other sectors, as UNODC for sure, and also from the private sector, which is an important component in this unprecedented situation, especially focusing on connectivity and e-learning platforms. Well, in October, member states adopted a declaration at the extraordinary session of the Global Education Meeting which UNESCO convened to commit to investing in inclusive and equitable quality education, lifelong learning now to reduce the impact of COVID-19. That means, concretely speaking, to put education as a priority in recovery funds policy and stimulus packages as well. Well, the crisis is for sure a turning point. We said many times, and it's very much true, an opportunity to catalyze transformations, to unlock innovations, so that the contents of education are more relevant and geared to the challenges that run deep in our societies more than ever. Building the next generation's values, competencies, attitudes to uphold the human rights, as my colleagues John Brandolino's already mentioned in his speech, and act for social justice is essential to recover from the COVID-19 crisis and truly build back better and resilient. Well, the 2030 Agenda recognizes, of course, very clearly the power of education for this. And in particular, global citizenship education, which is part of one of the targets of SDG 4.7. UNESCO prioritizes now this fundamental dimension of learning that resonates with our mandate to build the defenses of peace in the minds of people. So it's a very timely priority, which goes back to the very core mandate of UNESCO, starting from constitutional principles that are clearly expressed in our UNESCO constitution. Well, global citizenship education somehow nurtures empathy and transmission of values, which are about key words for this century: respect, dignity, and tolerance and solidarity. They are all critical values that we discover once again in this unprecedented disruption of our common way of life, not only in education, of course. It also aims to empower learners of all ages to assume active roles, both locally and globally, in building peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. It's about transmitting knowledge, provoking awareness and action. I think this is the chain of values that through global citizenship we can absolutely empower children and youth all over the world. With this in mind, our two organizations, UNODC and Unesco, are working together closely to bridge this gap. And we support countries in delivering educational programs that empower children and youth. And this is very much about helping youth to exercise actively and concretely their rights to think critically and make sound ethical judgments, act with integrity, challenge injustice, and promote fairer society. So it's a real ambitious project, but it's something that we can already see. We see in action, we see implemented concretely on the ground. You will hear this week, I'm sure, about the educational resources that UNESCO and UNDC jointly develop to promote these values and to implement this mission, common mission, including a guide for policymakers and teachers' handbooks. We'll also showcase the work of our International Institute for Educational Planning, the IEP, based here in Paris, on anti-corruption in the education sector, which is a specific chapter of the whole work we are doing together. Of course, everything we are talking about is very much about the future of our society. And we know rhetoric, we can say that the future is in our young people, in our youth hands, more than ours. And so now it's my pleasure to pass the floor to the youth representatives who will moderate the session today, Ms. Damaris Akigbe and Ms. Regine Guevara. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish a fruitful discussion in the coming days.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from whatever part of the world you're calling from. We are your hosts for today. I am Regine Guevara from Asian Youth Peace Network and Friends for Peace, and I am with my colleague.
Yes, my name is Damaris Akibe. I'm an Education for Justice youth champion.
Wonderful. Excellency, esteemed panelists and participants, we would like to welcome all of you to today's high-level opening of the Education for Justice Dialogue Series, Reimagining Education for a More Just World, Inspire, Change Together. Damaris herself is an E4J youth champion, and she can probably explain why we are here today.
Yes. Thank you, Regine. So I've been a youth champion for about a year, and the whole concept of Education for Justice is, teaching the next generation about the rule of law and the culture of lawfulness. And so it has done this through various platforms, through various means, teaching the university model, teaching through the secondary schools, and so many other things. So it has been a good journey. It has been a very good
I think we have a problem with
very interested and excited for. Yes, but could you hear me though?
I think, okay, maybe turning off your video would be good for the next.
Yes, exactly. Damaris, if you can just turn off your video and we'll just do with the sound. Sorry, just a little technical problem.
Thank you, Damaris, for sharing your experience. I think both of us, we share the feeling of solidarity for our fellow peers, young people from around the world, because if anything, this pandemic, as we know, brought humanity together, but also really showcased the power of youth and that we've already been contributing positively from wherever we're from. And one of the shared experiences that we have as young people is that we all agree that education is indeed a key for a more just world. One of the key challenges faced by young people lies on diversity and inclusion, which is at the heart of the SDG 16 nexus. And so we are here today to call on policymakers, decision makers, many stakeholders to include youth and to take on a youth perspective because their decisions impact the next generation, our generation. Would you like to add a bit more about your experiences as an E4J youth champion?
Yeah, exactly. I would, using my experience, I would say when I came into E4J, I didn't really know much about the rule of law or, human rights and all of that. But I think, with education and with the necessary tools that are given by Education for Justice, which are mostly, anybody can access them, whether you're in tertiary education, whether you're in secondary schools or in primary schools, they have very streamlined and very easy to access materials and resources that you can use to actually educate yourself on things like this.
Yes, so, and if I may add, personally also, well, I'm not necessarily a youth champion. Yes, I think we're back. Apologies for the connection. Damaris, are you still here with me?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, please go ahead. I was just talking about my experiences as a student in the university. I think you wanted to add something also about your academic journey.
Yes, I wanted to say how good it is that Education for Justice model and curriculum is not really streamlined the way, the stereotypical, classroom models are. You understand? They're very easy to understand, easy to follow, and easy to practice because actually these things, the advantages in the practice in society. So it's very easy to really put into practical use, and I think that's very important. Yeah.
And of course, to add to that, we have to be grateful to our educators and our mentors because really from both our experiences, and like I said, as a shared experience of many young people, really our educational institutions and our educators have played a crucial role, not only I know in our academic life, but also in our formation as leaders and to find inspiration for us to participate in society. So without further ado, I am honored to introduce our very first speaker, His Excellency, Mr. Tharwat Keilani, Assistant Deputy Minister of Educational Affairs of the State of Palestine. Excellency, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us today.
مساء الخير، أنا بدي أحكي باللغة العربية. مساء الخير لكم جميعا.
Good afternoon to all of you. I'm going to speak Arabic. First of all, let me say hello. Let me say hello to everyone throughout the world, and particularly my colleagues and participants. I'd like to also offer my greetings to UNESCO. I'm speaking on behalf of the Minister of Education of Palestine, Marwan Al-Attani, who asked me to step in for him. Our minister gives great interest to this sort of event. When we speak about education for justice, we have to raise basic principles and basic values. In Palestine, we have certain legal references which we base our work both internationally and nationally. The first reference is the UN Charter concerning the human rights and the right to self-determination. Unfortunately, the Palestinian people is still living under occupation, the occupation which had a deleterious effect on our own identity. We are suffering under the yoke of that occupation, and we demand the right to self-determination. Therefore, we need independence if we are fully to implement our basic laws for our constitution for the state of Palestine. We do have a law on education that was drafted by the Palestinian Council of Ministers. When we speak of education and justice, there are many other related subjects that are interdependent. There's a Palestinian law adopted in 2017, which is very clear when it comes to the promotion of the values of good behavior, of good citizens, in the light of the principles set forth in international legal instruments and the Human Rights Charter. That law also contains a chapter devoted to the development of curricula. The content of curricula must be respectful of the content of the most important international human rights legislation. The Minister of Education adopted a strategy for the education sector that covers the period 2017-2022. That strategy includes very clear measures regarding world citizenship and regarding sustainable development, in particular SDG number 4.
The Palestinian programs, therefore, are focused in this way, thanks to the framework law, in other words, on educational programming based on the rule of law, human rights, and democracy, because it is our desire to create a society, a nation, and a people which are involved in exercising in the full enjoyment of their human rights. This is reflected at several levels. We hope to promote a sense of nationalism and patriotism, and at the same time ensure that citizens play an active role and enjoy mutual respect between the state and themselves. There is also a respect for diversity, for freedom of worship, freedom of expression and opinion. And we also have international ambitions, too, for promoting humane societies, because we can't stand as an island. It's only by opening up to other cultures and other civilizations around the world that we can be strong. We are all part of this global family, and we have a right to take part in the construction of that world. It is our right, all within the respect of our own obligations, as long as the rights are respected on both sides. Another consideration that is vital for education, and that is the school curricula. School curricula have been studied and examined closely, so as to ensure that so that our school programs can be certified as respecting the international standards regarding global citizen education, human rights, and the basics of human rights and gender equality. We have sometimes independent modules and sometimes integrated modules, which are cross-cutting across different aspects of the school curricula. These school curricula also bolster the notion of democracy and justice. And since I'm on the topic of justice, as we mentioned earlier, our life in Palestine, unfortunately, is in a situation of occupation, which obviously has very serious effects. Another aspect that I wanted to address was some of the activities that we arranged, the activities for pupils and students, which are organized within the framework of different programs. For example, the Ministry of Education, as you know, has integrated human rights and justice into its work. At every level of teaching, starting with the pre-primary right through to the 6th year of primary education, we have a primary curricula which look at how to adapt to the situation, how to manage the situation when children are in contact with the instances of justice. We want them to understand what the real values are, where they lie, so that things are based on fairness. Justice, therefore, is a concept, is something that children are familiar with from a very young age. And as of the 7th year, right through to the school leaving exam, pupils are also given access to teaching as to how to undertake their learning in a creative, participative way so that they can fully play their role as future citizens. So they want to know about the electoral rights, respect for others, respect for diversity, etc. Once we get to the upper secondary levels, students are introduced to other more complex notions. They learn, for example, how to take on board this knowledge as a member of society and how to apply that knowledge in society. They learn about international law and the more complex notions of justice. And in this framework, we have cooperated with other institutions from civil society, for example, or from national institutions or international organizations such as the Red Cross, among others. And we've also brought other ministries into play when designing these courses. Therefore, in this, under this third aspect, we have tried to come up with frameworks of reference, and we have come up with the reference manuals for teachers. These teachers' guides, therefore, cover human rights, looking at the basic legal foundations of such rights. And this is a first in our region, the fact of having produced such a teaching guide. The guide is used widely in schools and is used by Palestinians within our country, but also those living in diaspora. Our teachers understand that preventing violence in all forms is of crucial importance, as well as preventing the phenomenon of xenophobia. It's important that hostility towards others is something that be shunned from a young age. We are against the concept of slavery. There is no such thing as a superior and inferior. Everybody is equal. Moreover, the accountability and transparency are other aspects that are mainstreamed into our school curricula. Student boards and even student parliaments are also formed. And these bodies are based on elected representatives of pupils and students, and they take part in cooperation with the ministry in mock councils. These are very widespread, especially in senior schools. and in tertiary education, but also in secondary school. These students' parliaments are quite widespread, and so participation in democratic life is something that students are able to experience from a young age. Our minister, Dr. Marwan, has taken part in some of these students' parliaments. There are also cultural competitions that are organized nationally and even internationally. Palestine has seen its participation widely rewarded. There are other projects and programs for students that have been designed. And what we're currently living through, this pandemic of COVID-19, is a challenge for the whole world. No one saw it coming. And initially, we had to make do as best we could. And now we've had time to look back and to think, to try to work out how to better respond in the future and how to build better. We have a project in Palestine to guarantee educational continuity and to guarantee healthy, safe environments for our students in cooperation with the Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Education. So there is cooperation at every level. And I can proudly state that the schools have reopened and that that services are up and running even in the most far-flung villages around the country without discrimination. Because here again, discrimination is something that we must shun. All students are treated equally. Teaching is performed in a flexible manner, taking into consideration any special needs children. Special needs learners are under the care of the Ministry of Education or civil society organizations, and we have specific programs for guaranteeing learners with disabilities their quality education. There are lots of organizations also that work in zones labeled either A, B, or C, depending on and also in the occupied areas, in the West Bank area, where we've had a lot of difficulties getting the services in those regions. But thanks to all of our efforts, we've been able to overcome these challenges. And in Jerusalem, too, the situation has been rather difficult. As you know, it's not possible for us to have direct contact with the Jerusalem schools. There is no direct channel for communication. And therefore, it's difficult for us to put in our school manuals and workbooks to the Palestinian schools located in East Jerusalem. This makes it very, very difficult to ensure the continuity of the Palestinian programs being taught in Jerusalem schools, because under the yoke of occupation, the problems are widespread. There is a lot of manipulation of school textbooks, which we see as an affront to the sovereignty of the State of Palestine. Despite all of these difficulties, we are continuing to work to provide all children throughout the country with a quality inclusive education. 98% of all children are enrolled in schools, and for the 2 remaining percent, we are doing our utmost to offer them access to education. We are trying to open pathways to those areas, and this has been possible thanks to the institutions that lend us their support. We're hoping in the future that we'll be able to achieve better justice and a transition to an unoccupied sovereign society in an independent state with clearly defined borders, and Jerusalem will be the border if we have our way. Thank you very much. It will be the capital if we have our way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Shukran Jazilan Maali Al Wazir. Apart from our family, it is really the school where we first learn what peace and justice means, because in the educational institutions, as the minister mentioned, that's where we first meet people who are different from us, right? Different religion, different culture, and so on and so forth. Damaris, what did you think? Would you like to introduce our next? We just like to remind all the speakers to try to be more time conscious. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I'd like to give the floor to a strong promoter of human rights and the rule of law. That's Her Excellency, Miss Isabel Mal. Your Excellency, Ma, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Buenos días con todos y con todas.
Good morning, good afternoon to wherever you are, since we're all in different parts around the world. In the Ministry of Education, it's of great importance that we take part in this high-level opening of the E4J dialogue series. And especially given that we see schools as such an important place for the construction of new knowledge for social and educational transformation in the country. The constitutional norm rule tells us that Ecuador is a constitutional state based on rights and justice, a social, democratic, sovereign, independent, unitary, intercultural, plurinational, and secular state. Which means that in a rights-based state, law plays a crucial role in if we're going to uphold citizens' rights, which means we need a new form of commitment so that every boy and girl, every young person can learn how to have a feeling of responsibility, of shared responsibility when it comes to building a common future. And in this sense, our national education system needs to focus on training citizens that have all the skills they need to fully participate and exercise democracy in their future lives as members of society. In a rights-based state, the creation of laws and rules is vital for the institutionalization of politics, for strengthening relations built on trust, and for mutual respect among all different stakeholders. And all of this, which is reflected in educational policy, will then has to be backed up with policies and curriculum guidelines, policies for peaceful coexistence, harmonious coexistence, and for training humans in the holistic sense. In other words, we have to always seek to guarantee levels of governance and justice that protect human rights for one and for all, and help people take on a full role in society in a constructive manner. The Ministry of Education is guaranteed that this is the ultimate goal of education, guaranteeing the holistic development of becoming a fully fledged citizen with the respect for human rights, sustainable development and democracy in a participative way, intercultural, democratic, inclusive and diverse, and all of this is a strategy for national development. And this is why we need to focus not only on what children learn in the classroom, but also in their more wider environment, a process which could lead to new knowledge. That way, they'll be best placed to face life out of school, armed with all of this knowledge to participate fully in their communities. Given the current context with COVID-19, the Ministry of Education has undertaken a whole range of measures to ensure educational continuity, and so as to avoid any spike in dropouts, repeated years and exclusion, considering all the different needs in all of the educational contexts of the country. It's so important for education to continue that there's no shirking this responsibility. And that is why the objective of my ministry is to bolster capacity, attitudes and values so as to contribute constructively into harmonious, peaceful coexistence, both in the scholastic environment and in society. And this is going to facilitate positively the relation between institutions, public institutions, and their policies, and the life of the students in fostering people's civic engagement to work towards peace and non-violence. And in this sense, educational continuity from a focus of rights comes fully into its own, because it's about protecting the right to education, be it formal education, non-formal, informal education. This is how it is incumbent on our organizations and ministries to facilitate educational systems and that provide the opportunities for a holistic development, equitable, inclusive, quality learning for everyone.
L'enregistrement a été. Cette conversation va être enregistrée.
Forgive me for the interruption, says the interpreter. And the virtual, remote, and distance learning methods are just some of the tools used to ensure educational continuity. And this was of most importance to not only for the students, but also for the socio-emotional support required for the students and their families. And these new tools can be understood as a way of ensuring a greater interface between the family and the school. This new reality means that this is a chance for families to better understand what goes on in the classroom, and it has given us a chance to redefine the role of families and teachers in the process of teaching and learning. Ensuring continued education, educational continuity, expanding the toolkit of all the options that we use to ensure this, and all of the different mechanisms that have been put into play in this emergency mean that that we can see this as an opportunity for change, and we're going to be able to have more innovative ways of legislating as we move forward. By way of conclusion, I can say that in a rights-based state, the real protagonists of public policy are citizens. And this would be a better way of producing policies in the future that work to the benefit of one and all, as long as such legislation serves as a shield to the integral protection of human rights. And so for my ministry, this link between the law and rights is of the greatest importance if we're going to build a country built on equity and justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. I think I agree with you. It's very important that education is holistic and is continuous. And thank you so much for your thoughts. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Damaris. Thank you, Your Excellency. The next speaker on our list is Her Excellency, Ms. Claudia Pereira, Secretary of State for Integration and Migration of Portugal. Excellency, we are looking forward to hear your thoughts.
Good afternoon, boa tarde. Good afternoon from Portugal, from a sunny afternoon in Lisbon. I am very honored and very happy to join this event. Definitely human rights cannot be left behind in a period of vulnerability as COVID-19. Indeed, this initiative, and as the former speakers have also highlighted, this initiative combines academia with action, and this also mirrors my journey and the professional background. Portugal created for the first time the State Secretary for Integration and Migration, which I'm very honored to assume. And what is the aim? The aim is to develop particularly immigrant, Roma, and refugee population and provide them structural pathways for full integration into society. And what means integration? It means to be part of society. And in this instance, we work mainly in 4 areas, among others, but mainly education, combined with employment, health and housing. And for this, if education for justice is so important for us. It's really relevant in an increasingly global and interconnected world where inequalities are increasing, as already stated. And Education for Justice, this website with all the resources for us and for so many countries, it really promotes opportunities and promotes social justice. So it's really an essential tool to empower tomorrow's leaders, such as Mrs. Giannini or Damaria, and the resources are very user-friendly in the website and very appealing. I would like to start by to tell you, an episode that besides its simplicity, I believe it's a very good reflection on the exercise of citizenship. So Portugal has welcomed unaccompanied minors from Greece, and we committed to receive 500 refugee minors. I went to a museum with some of them, and in a certain moment, a very simple moment, one of those boys from Afghanistan he was teaching a Portuguese child in the museum on how to make a windmill spin. So this is it's very simple, but it shows us as many times we don't need a formal education to interact, and many times that's when learning happens. We can create relationships and break the barriers of the unknown. And I would like to recall that most of those young boys are from Afghanistan and speak Dari or Farsi, and they are still not fluent in Portuguese. But the informal education is a precious tool, such as are the tools of the Education for Justice website. Particularly for the refugee boys, they have a central role because many of them they have an absence of childhood. This is one of the consequences of war. Not being able to play, not being able to attend school. And these day-to-day activities would allow these children to recover and acquire skills for their personal development, not only cognitively, but also socially. So the materials of E4J and the interactive games, their interactive videos are very important resources in the pursuit of this integration process, reaching themes as human trafficking, migrant smuggling, and cybercrime. I would like to talk you about three dimensions that E4J resources can and should be used outside of school, and particularly in Portugal. So first, language, second, diversity, and third, education. In terms of language and what we are promoting, language is also a signal of the implementation of human rights, being able to learn another language. For many children, school integration, as we know, it's a complex process, many times adapting to new social realities such as new language. And so these playful moments, as I told you, and others outside the schoolroom and communication between peers are essential to the integration process. So it's often in the informal learning, in playing, that fundamental sociolinguistic skills are acquired. And all the resources of the website of E4J, particularly for primary and secondary education, are very intuitive, smooth, and adaptable to the individual needs. Secondly, diversity. In addition to learning the language of the host country, it's important to also highlight the development of playful practices to develop multilingualism. So in the case of Portugal, to promote in school in Portugal, through the networks of schools for intercultural education. What is this? It's 123 schools that meet nearly all months to discuss questions related with intercultural education. And many times are schools with 20 or 30 nationalities inside their own school. So it's present these resources for the education for justice are very, very useful and are applied in these schools. And thirdly, I would also like to tell you about Choices program, in Portuguese, Programa Escolhas. These are 103 programs, usually usually working in regions where there is unemployment or where there is school dropout, and where the children go after the school. In these 103 projects of the Choices program, the aim is to achieve educational success, but the methodologies are substantially focused on non-formal education. So their education for justice materials, again, are a powerful tool for this program, reaching not only children, but also young people and the whole community through the game Dissonante, which I already started to try to play, or the amazing Zorbs. These are only some of the examples that mirror what we advocate: education as a means of social integration, individual and collective development.
L'enregistrement a été interrompu.
Particularly of immigrants and refugees. And in Portugal, we have been taking many structured measures, and we know we still need to take much more. But it's also important to recognize that all these actions of integrations have been recognized in the implementation of the Global Compact for Migration, considering Portugal as a champion country by the International Organization for Migration. And so we keep carrying on a better integration for immigrants and refugees in Portugal, and changes are needed in everyday education in order to value diversity. Diversity of cultures, diversity of resources, and diversity of learning context outside and inside the room. This is why I do believe that the project that today we are here celebrating, the E4J, is a living proof of the awareness and recognition of diversity. Diversity both as a way of implementing human rights and building true states governed by the rule of law. And to end, pluralistic societies require pluralistic methodologies, such as the E4J. Many thanks for translating E4J into Portuguese and into other languages. Congratulations and keep safe.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you. Thank you for reminding us that access to education is just the first step. You mentioned diversity and inclusion. It seems to be a recurring theme. We need to talk about, of course, education for justice, where we learn not only about ourselves, but also about the other, especially those left behind, and eventually do our part and, of course, hold our stakeholders accountable. In concluding this panel, we would like to invite everyone to watch and listen to the video message of His Excellency, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations and founder and co-chair of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens.
The COVID-19 pandemic has brought unprecedented educational disruption, with more than 1.5 billion students and youth across the planet affected by school closures. It has undermined the trust in the capacity of public services like education and health to respond to the crisis. The pandemic has also raised more fundamental concerns about a potential erosion of human rights now and post-crisis. Emergency measures and legislation taken at speed in a changing situation can infringe on rights beyond what might be necessary. Justice and the rule of law are key in order to address the challenges related to the current pandemic. Indeed, to uphold human rights, forge relationships of mutual accountability, and strengthen public trust. In this regard, governments face daunting responsibilities as they design, implement, and enforce due measures to prevent the spread of infection while ensuring equal and fair access to justice. Recovering from the pandemic in a sustainable and inclusive manner and upholding fundamental human rights can only work if justice and the rule of law are not broken or negatively affected by the crisis. It is crucial that we invest in strengthening these underlying pillars which serve to stabilize our societies. And it is more vital than ever to educate the next generations about good governance, strong institutions, equity, and the importance of a solid constitution. Education is a key ally in defending rights and protecting all of these basic principles of strong governments. It can empower young people to honor and uphold these values. Empowering children and youth to understand and exercise their rights is what will bring us on the right track to an equitable and sustainable future based on the universality of human rights. Thinking critically, making sound ethical judgments, acting with integrity, challenging injustice, and promoting fair societies is what makes a global citizen with a sound ethical and moral compass. I'm therefore thankful for the efforts of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime to bridge the gap between education and justice through the Education for Justice initiative, a component of the global program for the implementation of the Doha Declaration. I'm also proud that the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens is actively working with UNODC to empower youth as agents of positive change for the promotion and practice of justice and the rule of law.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, before we go to the last section and my closing remarks, I would like to apologize for some technical issues, but this is part of having an event online in different parts of the globe with speakers in different parts of the globe, and it comes to make our focus in the messages and not the technical glitch. It is my pleasure to be with you today to conclude our high-level opening section. Our keynote speakers addressed the importance of access to quality education and also the rule of law, considering also the breakout and immediate impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to thank all of the distinguished speakers who bring their remarkable expertise and visions and allow us to kickstart basically the event. If you allow me in a personal reflection the next 5 minutes, 2020 has begun and is an unusual year where people around the world face many challenges. Our efforts to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development have been effective, and we follow the deterioration in the provision of quality education, affecting mostly the more disadvantaged communities and more vulnerable persons. Hundreds of countries have been affected by school closures, and some of the speakers mentioned that 1.5 billion children out of the school. And of course, higher education institutions are also facing challenges worldwide. These are not just numbers. These are individuals and individual lives across the world who deserve that we, responsible community of global citizens, protect their rights to education and provide them with a brighter education where they can actually have the necessary tools to shape the world around them to be a better world. In a multifaceted world we live in, these are multiple factors that determine the opportunities to access quality education. Children and youth living in humanitarian catastrophes in contexts affected by poverty, war, conflict, or discrimination, as well as persons with disabilities, are particularly at risk for being deprived for their right to quality education. We cannot keep denying their talents, ideas, and capacity to transform our world. The world cannot afford to lose their talent, ambition, vision, and determination. Let's take a minute to remember the Secretary General's words. Every child has a right to a safe, healthy, peaceful childhood and to develop their full potential. Today's children are tomorrow's leaders, tomorrow's presidents and prime ministers, tomorrow's teachers and innovators, tomorrow's mothers and fathers, and even tomorrow Secretary Generals of United Nations. Despite the advancements in information technology, technology cannot replace a great teacher, a great academic that inspires our lives. Educators need our support more than ever. They need capacity building on rule of law education, quality resources and tools, and the venue to exchange their vision and their good practices. This is what we aim to provide in Education for Justice, jointly with our partners. Our vision is embedded on the Doha Declaration adopted during the last Crime Congress. The member states clearly said that children and youth must be involved in the promotion of rule of law. The whole of society approach is also part of the guidelines of the 2030 Agenda. This holistic society approach cannot be a reality unless we give children and youth tools to learn and space to shape their own societies. We have done a lot, but let's be honest, there is still a lot to do. While the pandemic has challenged us, it also shows us the unprecedented potential of the global solidarity and innovation in advancing our common goals. With the conclusion of this high-level opening, we are launching the Education for Justice Global Dialogue Series. Our objective is to ignite the discussions across various topics that are relevant to the empowerment of future generations through education. I look forward to the following more than 35 sections in different languages that will take place during the week, and welcome your contributions to a broader dialogue on how to address the recovery and revigoration of national educational systems worldwide, having the 2030 Agenda in our minds. Ladies and gentlemen, today is a milestone for UNODC and its partners as we officially launch the E4J Global Dialogue Series. We hope to become the largest gathering on education for rule of law organized by the United Nations. Let's try to make it happen together. Today is an important day because we will, and this is my expectation, my personal expectation, we will inspire change together. And towards that, and with that said, I hope it will be a fruitful discussions, and thank you very much all of you for attending our event and for the inspiration words of all the speakers. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.